Hello and welcome to Train Signal. You're watching Upgrading to vSphere and vCenter 5.1. We'll start this lesson off by talking about some of the general steps that you would perform to upgrade your VMware vSphere virtual infrastructure to the latest edition at the time that I'm creating this lesson, which is vSphere and vCenter 5.1. Now, when it comes to upgrading a production complex virtual infrastructure, the VMware vSphere Upgrade Guide is going to be your definitive guide for upgrading that type of infrastructure. In this lesson, I'll be covering a basic vSphere 5 to vSphere 5.1 upgrade. It's nothing complex. I'm not going to cover upgrading from ESX Server 3.5 or from vSphere 4 or 4.1. And I'm also not going to cover a scenario where you want to perform an upgrade with zero downtime. All of those scenarios and more are possible, and they're covered in the vSphere Upgrade Guide. So I encourage you to use that guide and read it before you perform a complex upgrade on your production virtual infrastructure. Now, when it comes to upgrading, the order that you perform the steps is very important. Don't go out of order. You need to upgrade sequentially in the order that the upgrade guide tells you to do, or the order that I perform the steps here. You need to ensure that you've met the minimum requirements for vSphere 5.1, including ESXi 5.1 and vCenter 5.1, because those requirements may have changed over time. The requirements could include your server hardware, your server CPU, the amount of RAM that's available on those servers, or even the version of Windows that you're running on your vCenter server. Also, make sure that you back up your data, especially your virtual machines, before you perform an upgrade. And finally, there's a brand new VMware vCenter 5.1 pre-installed check script, and virtualization blogger and vExpert Alan Renouf has created a video out on YouTube on how to use the script, and I have some hint that he may have had a hand in creating it as well. I'll be utilizing that script when I perform the upgrade in this lesson. Now, the general upgrade steps for upgrading to vSphere 5.1 include: you would start off with VMware vCenter, including the single sign-on installation, which I'll talk about a little bit more in just a minute. I also have a separate lesson on single sign-on, which is an important new piece of your vSphere 5.1 infrastructure. From there, you would upgrade the Update Manager application, then your ESXi hosts. You could do those manually, or you could do those automatically, let's say using Upgrade Manager. The virtual machine tools on each of your virtual machines, the virtual machine hardware on those virtual machines, and then finally your data stores and any other configurations such as VMware vSphere distributed switches. I briefly mentioned single sign-on. Let's talk a little bit more in detail how the new single sign-on feature inside vSphere 5.1 is going to affect your upgrade process. New in vSphere 5.1 is the single sign-on service, or SSO. It is required. You can't just say, nah, I'm not going to use single sign-on. If you're using vSphere 5.1, you have to have single sign-on in use and installed. Single sign-on authentication makes your vSphere 5.1 infrastructure more secure by providing a secure token mechanism. Once you have this token, then you can use that to authenticate to whatever virtual infrastructure resource you have out there, and it could be another virtual infrastructure and another vCenter server that happens to be using the same single sign-on service that you received your token from. Now, in this lesson, I'll just be performing an easy, simple, standard single sign-on installation / upgrade. But if you want more information on single sign-on, let's say you have a need to put single sign-on across multiple sites in your infrastructure, or you would like single sign-on to be highly available, there's some great resources out there on vmware.com to help you do that. So now, let me step you through the process of upgrading to VMware vSphere 5.1 and vCenter 5.1. Here I am in the VMware vSphere client, and notice right now, if we go up here to help, I am running the VMware vSphere client version 5.0 and vCenter version 5.0. I also have a single ESX host in this case, and it's running ESXi version 5.0. I also, of course, have a virtual machine that would need upgrading. If we go to the home screen and then into Update Manager, I also have Update Manager, again, version 5.0. So we have a number of things that we need to upgrade here The first thing I needed to do in this process is to download VMware vCenter version 5.1, and I've actually mounted the ISO onto this virtual machine because this is actually vCenter in a virtual machine. So if we go down here to the Start menu and open up Windows Explorer, I'll go to my computer. I'll open up the DVD drive here. Let's go ahead and close the vSphere client. And that brings up the VMware vCenter installer. And if you compare this screen to the vCenter installer version 5, which I actually had to just install to create this demonstration here of vCenter 5, you'll notice there's many fewer choices on the left-hand side of vCenter installer version 5. Of course, there's no single sign-on, there's no inventory service, there's no simple install. It's basically just installing vCenter. That's what you install. You install VMware vCenter Server here, you install the vSphere client, and then the web client and update manager are still separate. I don't believe there's as many support tools down here. I don't remember exactly. The main difference, though, of course, is the simple install, the single sign-on, inventory service, and vCenter Server. Those are all separate in the vCenter installer version 5.1. The first thing we want to do here to start the installation is actually to install single sign-on, but if you use the simple installer, that's what it will do for you first. And really, if you have a simple installation, meaning vCenter all on the same local server, then you can use that simple installer, and that's by far the easiest option or the easiest path. Now, if you have separate vCenter instances, or you have single sign-on on one server and maybe vCenter server on another server, then you're going to have to install these things separately. We also have a couple different tools that can help us. The first one down here is the vCenter Host Agent Pre-Upgrade Checker. So I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to say Install here. Let's go ahead and install this, because this will check to make sure that everything is in the state that it needs to be on the vCenter host. I also have a new PowerCLI script from VMware that will run in just a second to help us with the installation process. So let's go ahead and quickly install this. First, we need to select the DSN that we want to connect to. We'll select the VMware vCenter DSN, and we'll enter the administrator username and password. Click Next here. We'll say we want to scan all hosts for failures. Make sure that everything looks good here. And say we want to run the pre-check. At this point, we don't have any hosts that have errors. Everything looks good. I'll click Next here. The only host we have, the check did pass on that. There were no errors on the pre-check scan. The report tells us that the agent upgrade checker did not detect any errors. So it looks like we're good to go here. I'll click Next. Everything looks good with our vCenter host agents. So that's important to know about. The next thing I'd like to show you is the VMware vCenter 5.1 pre-install check script. This is a brand new PowerCLI script just posted recently, and it's actually a VMware fling. Flings are available from labs.vmware.com. They are VMware engineers' pet projects that they like to demonstrate and just see, what the feedback is on them, and perhaps they'll be incorporated into future products from VMware. So the fling that I downloaded is the vCenter 5.1 pre-install check script. This is the web page for the vSphere blog, and it covers the new fling by Alan Renouf. Alan's actually a well-known blogger and author of the book Mastering PowerCLI, or co-author of the book, I should say. And this is a script that he apparently wrote or had a major hand in. What it does is it goes out and it checks the following things before you install vCenter 5.1. Checks operating system, Active Directory, time synchronization, DNS, port checks, domain controller checks, vCenter server, authorization checks. There are some system requirements down here that you need to know about. It's relatively simple to do. If we go to the website for the fling, which is actually right here, it's very simple and quick to download. It's a very small PowerCLI script. There is a video on the video tab here that Alan created where he shows you how to use the script. I've actually already downloaded it. So let's go over to my PowerCLI prompt. And here at the PowerCLI prompt, I'm just going to run the pre-check v2.ps1 script. I'm going to say I want to run this once. I did already set my PowerShell execution policy to unsigned. That's something you have to do or at least loosen up the PowerShell execution policy to run scripts that you've downloaded from the internet. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to run this on the host name of my vCenter server, which is VC. As of yet, of course, I haven't installed single sign-on, so I'm just going to click Run Checks here. First, it checks to see if the currently logged on user is a member of the administrators group. This is a recommended part of the SSO install. I passed that check. Next, it checked to see if this operating system is a 64-bit operating system, as is required for vCenter 5 and vCenter 5.1, and we passed that. There's some information here about time sources. The next check is related to time synchronization. We are a little bit off on that. We didn't quite pass. It's not within the recommended 5 minutes. That's something you should check out if you didn't pass. If we scroll on down here, we passed the short file name registry key. We passed the host name length key. It tells us we did not pass the IP address to name check. So the VC host name that I have currently configured for this host needs to be mapped to this IP address. That's something I'll go and take care of in just a second before we perform the upgrade. We passed the computer name check, the locale check, the Active Directory local domain check. There's so many things to consider before installing vCenter 5.1, but fortunately this script checks out many of those things to ensure that we don't run into problems. You should run the script and you should try it yourself before you upgrade to vCenter 5.1, but it appears we passed everything except for the IP to DNS mapping check and the time check. So I'll take care of both of those before I start the upgrade. And again, I highly encourage you to try out this script for yourself before you perform your own upgrade. Again, you can find it at labs.vmware.com, and it's called the vCenter 5.1 pre-install check script. Now that we've run a couple different scripts to check the status of our virtual infrastructure before we start our deployment, it's time to get started. In the case of my relatively simple virtual infrastructure here, I'll be using the vCenter Simple install. But if you have a more complex infrastructure and you want to run your various vCenter services across multiple servers, you would have to use the various options available down here to install the services separately. So we'll start with the simple install here. I'll just click Install, and this will start off by installing single sign-on, as well as upgrading the other vCenter services. After a quick check, it says that vCenter Simple Install is ready to start installing single sign-on. I'll just click Next here. We'll accept the end-user patent agreement, accept the end-user license agreement, and here we need to set a password for the new single sign-on administrator account. Notice the requirements here: at least 8 characters, at least 1 lowercase character, 1 uppercase character, 1 number, and 1 special character. So we've got quite a few requirements here. I'm going to have to use VMware 123 with an exclamation point, and I'm going to have to capitalize the V. Let's see if that works. Capital VMware 123 exclamation point. Looks like that passed the password security requirements. Now we'll be installing a local Microsoft SQL Express instance for the vCenter single sign-on database. Of course, you do have the option to use an existing supported database. I'll just click Next here. We'll be taking quite a few defaults, being as we have a relatively simple installation. Next, we need to create some credentials that will be used inside the database. I have to enter a password for each of these. And click Next. We see here the fully qualified domain name or IP address of our vCenter server. That's already in place. I'll click Next. Next, we'll take the default to use the network service account for the Security Support Provider Interface Service, which of course is related to single sign-on. Take the default for the installation folder, default for the port number, and we're ready to install. I'll click Install here to start the single sign-on installation. So it'll take a few minutes. We'll be right back. With the single sign-on installation complete, the next piece to install is the vCenter 5.1 inventory service. So here we're given the option to either overwrite the existing inventory service database and replace it with an empty one, or do not overwrite, which is the default, the first option there, which leaves our existing vCenter inventory database in place. In my case, that's the choice I want to choose. I want to keep the information about my virtual infrastructure inventory, so I'll just click Next here. And then we're ready to install. I'll click Install to install the vCenter 5.1 inventory service. With our inventory service installed, next we're moving on to installing the new vCenter Server 5.1. Keep in mind that if you have any problems with the simple installer, as I did when my server happened to crash during the process of the vCenter server upgrade, when you come back, you'll just have to install each of the components individually, because you can't start the simple installer again if you've already installed one of the new components using that simple installer. So now we've got SSO installed, we've got the new inventory service installed, now we're installing vCenter Server 5.1. It says an earlier version of vCenter Server is already installed on this computer and will be upgraded to vCenter 5.1. Awesome, that's exactly what we want. I'll click Next here, accept the patent agreement, the license agreement. It tells us that our DSN is set up to use the integrated Windows authentication. That sounds good to me. I'll click Next. And here it gives us a warning that yes, we are currently using Vsphere Update Manager, and that we'll also have to upgrade Vsphere Update Manager, or else it won't be compatible with vCenter 5.1. Don't worry, that's on my list of components here to upgrade to Vsphere 5.1, so I'll just say OK. We'll choose to upgrade the existing vCenter database. And yes, I have taken a backup of the existing vCenter database and SSL certificates. Make sure that you do too. We'll click Next to continue. And then here we're told that we can either choose to automatically upgrade the vCenter agents on all of our ESXi hosts in the vCenter inventory, or we can do that manually, and then we'll have to reconnect those. I like the automatic method, but that may or may not be correct for your production infrastructure. You'll need to take that into account. If you're unsure, I would just choose manual, and then you can upgrade the agents yourself and then reconnect those manually. Now the vCenter service needs an account to run on. I'm going to use the administrator account and click Next. It gives us a warning here that the fully qualified domain name cannot be resolved with NSLOOKUP, and thus some features might not work properly. If you get that message, that's something you need to go out and Google, and just like me, ensure that the vCenter server host name can be fully resolved forward and backward with NSLOOKUP. I believe in my case I don't have a reverse lookup domain, although my vCenter services have been functioning just fine with vCenter and vSphere 5.0, so I don't believe it'll cause me a problem, but again, that's something you want to look up if you get the same message on your production infrastructure. We'll take the default for the ports here, the default for our inventory, because I have a very small virtual infrastructure. If your virtual infrastructure has more than 400 hosts and 4,000 virtual machines, one or the other, then you'll want to use the large inventory size, which can utilize actually a lot of RAM, 3 gigs of RAM for your vCenter services. And here we need to enter that password that we just got done creating for the SSO administrator account. I'll type that in and click Next. Here we get a notice that in the vCenter server database, there's users or groups that have admin privileges and are also recognized by vCenter single sign-on. It has put these users in a text file for us in the system temp folder for future reference. Here we'll choose to install the new certificate. We'll take the default for the new vCenter inventory service URL and click Next. Take the default for the destination folder. And we're ready to install the program. I'll click Install. And again, this will take a few minutes. We'll be right back. Okay, we're back, and at this point, the vCenter server installation has completed. We've successfully upgraded our vCenter server, installing the new single sign-on component, the new vCenter inventory service, and then our vCenter server 5.1 upgrade. I'll go ahead and click Finish to exit the installation wizard. And then I've got a couple other new pieces I need to upgrade here. The first one, we'll just go down the list, is the VMware vSphere client. Click Install to upgrade that. And I'm sure you've installed the vSphere client before, so I'm just going to take all the defaults on this. There's nothing new. We'll just click Next here to start the installation. Next, accept the license agreement, take the default installation folder, and click Install. This will take just a few minutes. I'll be right back. With the vSphere 5.1 client installed, I'll just click Finish here. And then next we'll move on to the vSphere web client. Of course, that also needs to be upgraded. Notice here the single sign-on is a prerequisite. So again, that's something that has to be installed before any of the other components when you perform your vSphere 5.1 upgrade. I'll click Install to install the vSphere 5.1 web client. Of course, this is the server side that's going to give us access to the web client through our web browser. It says, welcome to the installation wizard for the vSphere web client. Again, we had a previous version. It's telling us that here, and we know we want to upgrade it. So I'll just click Next and really take all the defaults. Default for the port numbers here. Here we need to provide the SSO username and password that we already know we've configured earlier. Click Next. And install. Again, this will take just a minute. Be right back. With our vSphere web client upgraded to version 5.1, I'll click Finish. Now, before we move on and upgrade Update Manager, I should mention that I've been having some difficulty upgrading Update Manager because it says that my vCenter server cannot be found. So I check my services, and sure enough, my vCenter service is not running, and it says it can't start actually because a dependency cannot be fulfilled. Well, that dependency is because actually I'm running Windows Server 2012, and you may or may not know, but Windows Server 2012 is not yet supported with vCenter 5.1. So fortunately, there is a workaround, and I'm going to go execute that workaround right now. It has to do with going into the registry and removing something called protected storage as a dependency so that the vCenter services can start. I'm not going to go into it here in the lesson because instead what you should be doing is not running Windows Server 2012. I just happen to be running it because I created this vCenter server version 5 virtual machine fresh just for this demonstration. But I'm sure if you've been running vCenter Server 5 for some time, you wouldn't have been using Windows Server 2012 to do it. So with that, I'm going to make this tweak, which you can find out in the VMware community forums if you're interested. I'm going to restart the server, and then I'll be right back. Next, let's proceed on with the upgrade process by upgrading vSphere Update Manager. Now it tells us that an earlier version of VMware vSphere Update Manager is already installed. Click OK to upgrade to version 5.1. We'll click OK. And click Next to start the installation. We'll accept the end-user license agreements. And then now we're told that Update Manager, once upgraded, will remove older patches for virtual machines and hosts. That's fine with me because we want to upgrade those virtual machines and hosts to the latest version related to vSphere 5.1. But for now, I'm going to uncheck the box to download new updates from the internet as soon as installation is complete, because that's something we can do later, and we have a number of other upgrades to perform. I'll just click Next here. At this point, we need to enter the vCenter server host name, port number, and administrative username and password. I'll just type in the password, and we should be good to go here. I'll click Next. Before we move on, I want to point out something very quickly when it comes to troubleshooting. On this previous screen back here, if you have any trouble getting this to complete and go on to the next step, the first thing I would go and check is to make sure that your vCenter services are up and running. If you look in Windows Services here, make sure that your VMware vCenter management server and, more importantly, Virtual Center server service are running. For whatever reason, I had a problem where mine were not running. I also read out on the VMware community forums that many people have had a problem here where they need to enter either localhost or the loopback IP address for the host name, or they need to enter the username with the domain in front so that they can properly authenticate to the vCenter server service. However, if your vCenter server service isn't running at all, no matter what you enter into these fields is going to help you to successfully authenticate. So I'll just click Next here. At this point, we get to verify our database information, which all looks good, and click Next. Here we get the chance to upgrade our vSphere Update Manager database, and we do need to indicate that we have taken a backup, which you should do before you perform this upgrade, and then click Next. Now we're asked how we'd like this vSphere Update Manager to be identified on the network. Let's go ahead and use the fully qualified domain name for the vCenter server and click Next. Finally, we'll click Install to begin the installation. This will take a few minutes. We'll be right back. At this point, vSphere Update Manager's upgrade installation has completed. I'll just click Finish here. And now we've installed everything on the top half of the list here. vCenter Single Sign-On, vCenter Inventory Service, vCenter Server, the vSphere Client, the vSphere Web Client, and vSphere Update Manager, upgrading all of these to vSphere 5.1 from vSphere 5.0. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and close the vCenter installer, and then we'll go ahead and run the new vSphere 5.1 client. We'll go ahead and log into our vCenter server with the administrative username and password. We'll accept the security warnings and ignore those. Those are just standard messages. And here we go. We're inside the new vSphere 5.1 client. Let's go up to Help, down to About VMware vSphere, and notice we are indeed running vSphere Client version 5.1 and VMware vCenter Server version 5.1. That's great news. That means the upgrade was successful and we're able to connect our vSphere Client to the vCenter Server. If I say OK here, let's go into Hosts and Clusters, and then if we start at the top here, notice we have a vCenter Server running version 5.1. That's thanks to our upgrade. If we go to the ESXi host, here we still have the host running version 5.0, so we still need to upgrade that. And then we have the virtual machine still running virtual machine hardware version 8, and of course the VMware tools will need to be upgraded or installed in this case. Normally your virtual machine tools would need to be upgraded. How are we going to do it? Well, if we go to the home screen, we'd like to be able to do it using VMware Update Manager. However, VMware Update Manager isn't on the list of icons here. At least I don't see it. Let's go into Plugins and manage our plugins. And here we need to upgrade to the new VMware vSphere Update Manager plugin. So let's click here to do that. Of course, we could insert an ESXi 5.1 DVD into the physical server DVD drive and perform the upgrade there. And we could upgrade our virtual machine tools and hardware versions one by one individually. But Update Manager can automate that process for us and even ensure that there's no downtime for virtual machines that are running in DRS HA clusters by upgrading our ESXi hosts one at a time. I'll just click here to start the installation of the vSphere Update Manager client. And then walk through this quick standard Windows installation. With our installation completed, I'll click Finish here. We'll need to install the certificate and click Ignore. And now we have vSphere Update Manager vSphere Client plugin enabled. I'll click Close here. And notice we have a new icon down here. I'll click on the Update Manager solution. And then we've got the Getting Started tab here to help walk us through the process of upgrading our ESXi hosts and our virtual machines. We'll start by downloading patches and upgrades. It says a new download task has started. See Recent Task pane for details. If we go down to the task pane here, we'll see, indeed, we did successfully download new patch definitions. And if we go to our patch repository, here notice by release date, we've got a number of new patches, including, if we right click on this, show patch detail, patches even for VMware ESXi. So we've got patches, but one thing I do want to do is to import some ESXi images. If we go in here to ESXi images, notice there's no images, so let's import an ESXi image so that we can use this to upgrade our ESXi hosts. I'll click Browse here. And I've got the VM Visor. This is version 5.1 of vSphere that we'll be installing on our ESXi host. So I'll click Open here. It finds the file. I'll click Next. We'll need to ignore the security warning here. And then it'll upload that ISO image to vSphere Update Manager. We get a message that the upload was successful. We successfully uploaded vSphere 5.1. There's the build number, creation date, and so forth. We'll click Next here. And now let's create a new baseline for this ESXi image. I'm going to call this ESXi 5.1. We'll create the new baseline and click Finish. As you can see here, we've got the image imported into our library. There's a number of associated software packages. Let's go to the baselines and groups, and you see the new baseline that we created. If we go into Compliance view, that brings us into the Host and Clusters view, but over on the vSphere Update Manager tab. So here, what we can do is to click Attach, and we want to attach a baseline, this new ESXi 5 baseline, to this ESXi host. With the baseline attached, let's go ahead and click Scan. And we want to scan for upgrades. In this case, all we're interested in is the actual upgrade. Once we had our host upgraded, of course, over time, you would want to use vSphere Update Manager to update or upgrade with host patches as well as virtual machine tools patches or even VMware appliance upgrades and patches. If we go down to tasks, we can check on the status of our scanning. The scanning is complete. We get a red X here, and let's click on details. We find out, of course, that this host is not compliant. This host is running vSphere version 5, and it isn't compliant with the baseline that we created, which matches up with vSphere version 5.1. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to remediate that. We could, of course, do a stage first, but let's just go ahead and do a remediate. Staging will actually download the upgrade or patches to the host, and then remediate will apply them, or it will actually download and remediate at the same time if the patches haven't yet been staged. In our case, they haven't been staged, so we're going to be downloading and applying at the same time. We'll be moving from ESXi 5, which you see right here, to the upgrade ESXi 5.1. I'll click Next. We need to accept the license agreement. Click Next. We get a notice here about third-party software. I don't have any third-party software. running at the Wired Brain Coffee Company. So we'll just click Next, and then we'll just call this ESX3 vSphere 5.1 upgrade. We'll say we want to do this immediately. Now, of course, we're warned that this host may need to go into maintenance mode. We know it will need to go into maintenance mode and actually reboot for this upgrade to be performed. Now, if you had an HADRS cluster, you could actually use vSphere Update Manager to automatically vMotion virtual machines that were running to another host, perform the upgrade, and then vMotion the virtual machines back so there's no downtime. In this case of my simple lab environment here, I just have a single host and a single virtual machine, so we'll actually have to shut down that virtual machine. And that's what this warning is about here. So here I can say that I want to suspend or power off the virtual machines before the upgrade's performed. Let's just do a suspend, and I'll click Next. Finally, we're about to perform the upgrade here to ESXi 5.1. I'll click Finish. Let's go down here and check on our task. We've got the Remediate Entity task running down here on host ESX3. This will take a few minutes. I'm just going to go over here to the Summary tab. Notice right now we're running ESXi 5. What I'll do at this point is pause the video recording, and when we come back we should be running version 5.1 of ESXi, unless some message comes up before then that I want to show you. We'll be back in just a few minutes. As you can see, our VMware ESXi server has been upgraded to vSphere 5.1. That's thanks to the Update Manager installation and remediation that we just performed. As you can see down here, it says Remediate Entity for target ESX3 was successfully completed. Now, if we select the host and then we go over to the Update Manager tab and then run a rescan here, checking for upgrades of the host. With the scan complete, we can see that this host is incompliant. It is 100% compliant. There's the compliance state. If we look at the virtual machine, we can see it has hardware version 8, or virtual machine hardware version 8. That needs to be upgraded. It also needs VMware tools upgraded. Now, since I have just a single virtual machine in this example, most likely it doesn't make sense to use Update Manager, but keep Update Manager in mind for large production environments where you have many virtual machines, because it can remediate and update your virtual machine hardware and VMware tools automatically. In the case of this virtual machine, let's go ahead and just power it off, because we won't be able to upgrade the virtual machine hardware without powering it off. We can go to the Update Manager tab here, and notice it says that we need to go to the virtual machine and templates inventory so that we can attach a baseline. We can attach a baseline, in fact, to all the virtual machines in our virtual data center. Here I can click Attach, and let's just say we first attach a virtual machine hardware upgrade baseline. It says we have one virtual machine that is incompatible. Let's go ahead and remediate that. We'll use the upgrade baseline to match the latest virtual machine hardware. We'll call this VM hardware upgrade, and we'll say that we want to perform this immediately. I'll click Next. I'm not going to take a snapshot of the virtual machine before it happens. And here's the upgrade that will be performed. I'll click Finish. And what's it tell us down here? VMware Tools is not installed. To upgrade virtual hardware, VMware Tools must be at the latest version. So really, this virtual machine needs VMware Tools first. Let's go to the virtual machine, and let's go ahead and click Edit Settings here. We'll go into Options, to VMware Tools, and then let's check and upgrade tools during power cycling for this virtual machine. I'll click OK there. We modified the virtual machine. Let's power it on. As you can see, the virtual machine is now powered on, and the VMware tools, it says, are running and current. So those VMware tools were upgraded when the virtual machine was powered on because of the settings change that we made for this virtual machine. Your virtual machines may be configured that way, but they may not be. They may still need their VMware tools updated manually, or you can do that through Update Manager. However, if you look at the virtual machine, notice the virtual machine version of its hardware is still version 8, so it does need updating. We can go into the virtual machine Update Manager tab or to the Update Manager tab for the entire virtual data center. Here we see that now one virtual machine is non-compliant. Down here, this virtual machine that we're looking at is indeed non-compliant. So to get the virtual machine compliant, let's click Remediate here. And we'll go through this remediation process, upgrading the virtual machine hardware. Let's give it a name like virtual machine hardware upgrade. We'll go ahead and do it immediately. We'll click Next. I'm not going to take a snapshot of the virtual machine. We're just going to upgrade the hardware, so I don't believe that's really that important. Here's what we'll be upgrading: the virtual machine hardware to match the host version of vSphere. I'll click Finish there. Notice down here we are remediating an entity. Let's click on the virtual machine, then on the Summary tab. Notice it says version 8 right there. Let's watch that and wait for it to change. There we go. Now notice it says VMX 09. That's virtual machine hardware version 9, which is compliant with vSphere version 5.1. With a couple more seconds of waiting, we get our virtual machine tool status updated here, and we can see that they are still running and current. Excellent. It looks like we successfully upgraded this virtual machine's hardware using the Update Manager functionality, and that's something that you could do to all your virtual machines in the virtual infrastructure. A couple other things you may want to check in the virtual infrastructure along with the vSphere 5.1 upgrade is make sure that your data stores are also upgraded to VMFS version 5. If you go in here, take a look at your data stores, notice this one is running VMFS version 5. You want to make sure that they're all version 5. Also go into your networking inventory. And if you have virtual distributed switches in here, I do not at this point, but you want to make sure that your virtual distributed switches are also upgraded to be in compliance or to match vSphere version 5.1. Alright, at this point we've successfully upgraded our virtual infrastructure to vSphere 5.1. As part of that, we installed vCenter Single Sign-On version 5.1, the vCenter Inventory Service version 5.1, the vCenter Server version 5.1. We upgraded our vSphere client. We upgraded vSphere Update Manager, and then use that to upgrade our ESXi hosts, our virtual machine tools, and our virtual machine hardware. With a successful upgrade completed, we can breathe a sigh of relief. And with that, let's go back to our slides to conclude this lesson. Thanks for watching this lesson covering upgrading your vSphere virtual infrastructure to vSphere 5.1 and vCenter 5.1. I hope you learned a lot about this process, which is going to be critical in you successfully making the move in your production infrastructure to VMware vSphere 5.1 so that you can enjoy all the other new features that I cover in this video training course. Thanks for watching.